let's proceed with the next TTS Presidential Address. May I invite Dr. Marcelo Kantorovich for the TTS Presidential Address. May I invite the chairpersons for this, Dr. Mehmet Haberal, Dr. P.P. Verma, and Dr. Deepak Govil. Over to the chairpersons.
Thank you to the organizers and to Sanofi for inviting me to speak today on minimizing allograft rejection in renal transplantation. I'm Dan Brennan. I'm the medical director of the
As you can see, the TTS congresses, the last congress in person was in 2018 in Madrid. Then the congress in South Korea was virtual. You can see all the presentations at the TTS webpage. Then we created workshops and regional meetings. For instance, in Abu Dhabi, workshop on best practices on organ donation and transplantation. Professor Haberal. I would like to thank Professor Vivek Kute and the organizing committee of the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation for the opportunity of presenting today. What is the percentage of the global organ transplantation needs that are fulfilled? What's the vision and the mission of the TTS, an NGO in association with the WHO? The TTS will provide the focus for global leadership in transplantation, the development of the science and clinical practice, continuing education, scientific communication, and guidance on ethical practice. This is data of the global activity in organ transplantation for 2019 from the Global Observatory on Donation and Transplantation from the ONT and the WHO. You can see the figures on the screen. Less than 10% of the global needs were fulfilled. Here you can see the global transplant activity, all organs for 2019. Darker colors in red depict increased activity, followed by purple, dark blue, then less activity in light blue, and gray depicts no activity or no reporting. There is a need to increase access to organ transplantation worldwide. What's the role of the TTS? Education of transplant healthcare professionals, standardized practice, India Relations Committee, TTS champions, and the next steps. This is the outline of the presentation. With regards to the education, the TTS has a variety of educational potential. As you can see, the TTS congresses, the last congress in person was in 2018 in Madrid. Then the congress in South Korea was virtual. You can see all the presentations at the TTS webpage. Then we created workshops and regional meetings. For instance, in Abu Dhabi, workshop on best practices on organ donation and transplantation. Professor Haberal organized the first regional meeting in Istanbul with the goal to increase disease donation in 2019, followed by an international symposium on disease organ donation and religion that took place in Ankara in 2020, just before the pandemic. Then there are section congresses, as you can see here, International Society of Uterus Transplantation coming up soon. The Split Congress, a symposium from the International Pediatric Transplant Association, the International Congress of the Transplant Infectious Diseases, an upcoming legislative and policy forum that will take place in Montreal this month. You can all see webinars that we call masterclass series. The webinars were adapted for the needs of each region, and you can see all of this teaching material, educational material in the TTS webpage. Then there are webinars from Women in Transplantation, looking at professional diversity and gender equity in transplantation, from the Intestinal Rehabilitation and Transplant Association, from the Anesthesia and Critical Care Committee from the TTS, from the ISOT, from the International Pancreas and Islet Transplant Association. What about standardizing practice? The TTS played a key role in the Declaration of Istanbul on organ trafficking and transplant tourism. And you can see the publication. Then the ethics statement of the Vancouver Forum on the live lung, liver, pancreas, and intestinal transplant, living donor transplantation. Then the third international consensus guidelines on the management of CMV in solid organ transplantation. What about the India Relations Committee? This committee was created by the past TTS president, Professor Mehmet Haberal, and it included people from the TTS, ISOT, and NATO. The goal was to assure transparency and reporting of the transplantation activities in India and to increase access to transplantation. Here is a screenshot of the TTS India Relations Committee in November of 2018. You can see pictures from the people that you know, Professor Haberal, Nancy Asher, Frank Delmonico, Mini Sarwar, Peter Stock, Sandeep Guleira, and Vivek Kute. Then we had another meeting in March of 2019 in Istanbul, and you can recognize Sunil Shrod, Vivek Kute, Jean-Pierre Mongeau, who recently retired from the TTS, Mini Sarwar, Peter Stock, Sandeep Guleira, and Nancy Asher. What are the TTS champions? The TTS champions are key representatives from all the TTS regions. Many of you are TTS champions. What are the goals of the champions? To identify barriers to access to transplantation in their jurisdictions, to liaise with local governments with the help of the TTS executive, and to reduce barriers and increase access to organ transplantation. What are the next steps? And I'm dividing this into two aspects, education and to advise governments. With regards to education, we are sending needs assessments to identify gaps in knowledge, skills, and practice. And with those results, we will be able to develop educational activities addressing the needs of the countries and regions. As an example, we recently sent a needs assessment to the Critical Care Society of India. And we asked 6 questions. I will read them for you. In blue, you will see the current knowledge of the respondents. In red, you can see the desired knowledge. And this difference is the knowledge gap. So the highest gap was 0.95, and the question was donation after the termination of death by circulatory criteria, followed by how to approach families of possible organ donors, then evaluation of donor medical suitability, then management of the brain dead donor, then identification and refer of possible organ donors. And then there was no gap with regards to the definition and declaration of brain death. The webinars will be available shortly, addressing all these topics. And the way has been structured is the following. There will be international speakers, and the members will include representation from the Critical Care Society of India, from the India Society of Organ Transplantation, and the TTS Anesthesia and Critical Care Committee, who's spearheading this educational event. Moreover, there will be a global needs assessment that will be emailed very soon, so you will be receiving it. And it will be addressed to hospital, medical, and administrative structure, critical care specialists, transplant physicians and transplant surgeons, general topics, and then specific topics addressed to transplant nephrologists and kidney transplant surgeons, transplant hepatologists and liver transplant surgeons, intestinal failure specialists and intestinal transplant surgeons, transplant cardiologists and cardiac transplant surgeons, transplant respirologists and lung transplant surgeons, pancreas transplant specialists and pancreas transplant surgeons. Again, we will look at the gap in knowledge, and we will prepare webinars that will be focused to each region. With regards to advising governments, there was a recent workshop organized by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the WHO, spearheaded by Francis Delmonico, Nancy Asher, and Beatriz Dominguez-Gill from the ONT. We will request governments, national agencies, and ministries of health to address the burden of diseases resulting in organ failure requiring organ transplantation, the need to prioritize organ transplantation as a treatment option for patients with organ failure by considering technical aspects to develop and optimize organ transplantation, strengthening the regulatory capacity for oversight of practice, to standardize criteria to list patients for organ transplantation from deceased donors. And at the bottom, you can see references from the Canadian Society of Transplantation for kidney, liver, and heart transplantation, to select donors and recipients for living donor transplantation, to promote educational events about standardized listing criteria for organ transplantation, to implement such standards with the help of regional TTS champions, to urge member states, stakeholders responsible for organ donation and transplant policy to assess criteria for the allocation of organs from deceased donors, to enable patients with organ failure to have access to organ transplantation from deceased donors, standardized by medical criteria. To promote standards of practices to optimize organ transplantation as a treatment for patients with organ failure, to increase access to organ transplantation from deceased donors based on medical criteria, not advantaged by gender, ethnicity, or social status. We will develop report cards using data available through the ONT and GODT. And finally, there is a proposal from the ONT to the WHO in preparation for the 2022 World Health Assembly, and the support of India would be very important. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, there is a need to increase awareness about organ donation and access to transplantation worldwide. We need to prioritize organ transplantation as an option for patients with organ failure. We need to standardize listing criteria. We need to promote educational events at all levels, starting in elementary and high school, universities, and postgraduates. We need to assess the allocation criteria for organs from deceased donors. And I would like to close showing a slide that was prepared by my wife, Andy, looking at the relationship between meetings and level of engagement and enthusiasm. So here you can see that the level of enthusiasm is very high at a meeting like now. But then we go back home. We are on call. Some of us need to go to the OR, and the level of enthusiasm and engagement may decrease. We need to avoid this by closing the gap, having more meetings, continue discussing and acting on the decisions that we make, with the goal to increase access to ethical transplantation worldwide. I would like to invite you all to the TTS 2022 Congress that will take place next year in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in September. Ideally, it will be in person. See you in Buenos Aires. And I would like to thank you so much for the opportunity of presenting today, closing with this beautiful picture that was sent to me by Vasenti Ramesh. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in person next year.
I think it's a wonderful talk, what has come. No, I think that's a wonderfully addressed issue, how we can increase the diseased organ transplantation. I'm sorry I joined late, so I cannot give much of comments, but I enjoyed whatever I listened to the talk. I enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Govind.
Yeah, so wonderful talk by Professor Marcelo, and the collaboration between Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, the Transplant Society of Indian Transplant Society, and the TTS will go a long way in providing the knowledge, covering the knowledge gaps and providing the education to all. And I'm sure that the Dr. Verma's query about how to increase the donation of disease donation organs will also be taken care by these webinars. So in future, we are planning with TTS and ISOT with series of webinars to take care and fill this knowledge gap. And as Professor Marcelo has rightly said, in the next survey, we will again try to find out what are the knowledge gaps existing in existing knowledge. And with this collaboration, I am sure and I am hopeful that we'll be able to move forward and cover some knowledge gaps. That's what my take on.
Thank you, Professor Govind, Professor P.P. Verma, for chairing this session.